Hello, everybody. Tara Bachland here with the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism. And we're giving another go to the healing potential of Tulip Poplar for trauma. This is part 2. And I have a feeling we'll go ahead and repeat some of the stuff from the beginning because you can't leave out anything when it comes to this herbal medicine. And I know we're both very excited to dive in. Thanks again, Amanda. I'm excited to explore yet another herb as part of your book, Flowers for a Girl.
Yeah, thank you, Tara. And I'm especially excited about this herb because, as you know, it's my favorite. It's Tulip Poplar. So I'm sort of excited to see what's going to come through because I think I mentioned to you before our last conversation, Flowers for a Girl was published in 2017. So it's been 7 years with this tree, 7 more years. And they have been full years. So I'm really curious to see what's going to come through this time.
I think 2017 was kind of a pivotal year, at least in my life. And I wonder how many other people's lives. And it wasn't that long ago, but it was. And enough time to make significant change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2017, 2018, 2019, and of course 2020 for all of us with what happened with the pandemic. But where I live, it was just pivotal for almost my entire circle group, which is curious because, and this really wasn't part of the conversation that was planned, but 2018 was the eclipse. And the solar eclipse actually passed over where I live. I was one of the places that could see the full eclipse. What do they call it? Totality, you know. And some people say astrologically that places that are able to witness visibly these solar eclipses experience those changes that come with them more potently. I'm a believer. I'm not so sure I would have believed that before that year, but it's just been really life changing and shifting. So I don't think we're alone. I really don't.
Alone, and as far as experiencing those shifts, is what you're
Yes,
saying.
yes. And it's interesting because, again, not expecting this, but when I say it's been 7 years, 7 is such a significant number. It's such not the end in a negative way, but a fullness of a cycle. So this is kind of interesting to me to have this conversation today.
It's a very spiritual number, many would say.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is. And tulip poplar I've experienced it as a very spiritual tree. I think that the spiritual aspect of things is present everywhere, in all of nature and all of the plants. But I would say this tree for me has really been what I would call a spiritual teacher. That's one of the things that's changed most significantly for me, even is um, the spiritual lens, through which I view the world. That's been one of the changes.
Mm-hmm. For those who are just joining us, this is actually a series of talks, and it's based on your book, Flowers for a Girl, which I had just showed, and I'll show it again in a bit later, plant medicine and sexual trauma. And I'll say it again because it's definitely worth saying. It is a very lovely book. Poetic, but if you're a person that's doesn't quite get poetry, which I don't always get, it has a poetic nature, but you can understand it. And as far as the trauma, you go just far enough into like the nuance, but not the details. And I myself, and I think many of us experience trauma in life, you'll find it very relatable. I found it very relatable, even though my trauma was in a very different area, and also very healing. And you go through a series of herbs that were helpful for you in your healing journey. And tulip poplar is kind of like it's the last on our journey, but certainly not the least, and not last forever.
Mm-hmm.
As far as you'll always be on a journey in discovering herbs. But what's so interesting to me is, since I've known you several years now and have witnessed, like, those who are into herbs have this sense, they know that they have a plant ally, right? You have one, you might have a couple over your life that are just like they're your herbs, like you can always rely on them for that kind of the pattern, that they just really match really well with you. But it seems to me like tulip poplar to you is more than a plant ally. How would you describe tulip poplar, how it is for you?
Yes, it's much more than a plant ally. So you've heard me use this phrase, others may have too, but I've started to say, I am the tree and the tree is me. And I really mean that. There's a oneness to it. And so, Matt has this book that he sometimes offers. Oh, I wish I could remember the title. It's about plant profiles, and I believe the author's first name is Dorothy. But what she does is she takes different plants like chamomile, and then she personifies them, and she describes the person that would most like benefit from or pair up with chamomile. She's saying chamomile has a personality, chamomile people have a personality, right? So we also talk about animal medicine, in the class that Matt and Chris and I did, and where we have the animal medicine also mirroring the plant, mirroring the people. So this is how I feel about tulip poplar, that I am a tulip poplar person, but it's more than that. Like, it's just, I don't know how the world works. We all have different belief systems. I even have a different belief system for myself. I don't even sometimes know what I'm saying to myself, but I just feel that this tree and I are, one, and I know it because there's been a lot of medicine coming through with that, and that part of what I'm here to do, especially, is not just share plant medicine generally, or even plant communication generally, though I can, but to particularly speak for and as tulip poplar. Like, it's like some people may have this experience, and this feels important to say. It's like your life plays out as the medicine. You're embodying it. Your life, your story, your way of being is that particular plant. Maybe other people have that experience with others, but for me, it's tulip poplar.
Kathy asks in the chat to talk more about the spiritual aspects of herbalism, which I think is woven into each of our talks. But how would you maybe explain or describe herbalism as a spiritual path or outlet or experience?
Yeah, so I have a friend, Danu. He's lovely. He created something called Grokist, and I actually share plant medicine on that platform. And it's not an herbal platform. It's just for curious people of any background. And it's interesting because Danu has brought into my consciousness the use of a word that's really common, but I just never grasped it until he used it. And he talks about a practice. What is your practice? And in my conversations with Danu, we've decided that my practice is listening. That's my practice. And the way that I primarily listen is with the plants. I primarily listen with the plants. So for me, the spiritual aspect that I see to herbalism is that it can be this way for all of us. But for some of us, especially, we have an affinity for nature. We have an affinity for the plants. And so they really are like a portal or companions as a way of practicing, tapping into and listening to the divine voice that for myself, I think is in all of nature, because it's like, let's see, her name is escaping me at the moment. It'll come in a second. Joni Mitchell, Case of You. She sings this song, Case of You, and there's a line in it that says, a part of you pours out of me in these lines from time to time. She's talking about being an artist and painting, and how this person pours out in the lines that she paints from time to time. And this idea that the artist, the spirit of the artist, the essence of the artist is in the creation. And so that's how I feel about it. So for me, it's been a way that I listen. It's been a way that I tap in. It's been a way that I pray. And particularly with Tulip Poplar, this plant is a really nice way for me to illustrate this concept I have of, the phrase is instruments of incarnation. That might be a lot for some, but the way that I think of it is, we're humans, right? And so we're souls in this flesh, in this body. So those from the Christian background would think of Jesus and the idea of incarnation, of the divine taking on human form. So, on a certain level, that's how I feel that the plants work with each of us, that we're here and we're human, but we've forgotten a lot of things. We've forgotten how to be human. We've forgotten that we have souls. We've forgotten the divine connection that we have, the divine aspect of ourselves. And so, for me, when we tap into the plants, it's almost like they flip switches inside of us. So, rose will flip a certain switch, tulip poplar will flip a certain switch, oak will flip a certain switch. And it's like a way that we start to remember and begin to embody, I think, certain spiritual aspects of ourselves and incarnate, come more fully and fully into being who we're meant to be, who we are as humans with eternal souls. So I don't know how everybody feels about all those words, but that's how I experience it. And I think you and I have talked about before that when I first came into herbalism, um, I was curious about plant communication because I heard little whispers of it. But I was a pastor's wife at the time in a very conservative Christian church, head coverings, no musical instruments. You know, people have heard this before if they've heard me speak. So this really wasn't going to be allowed. It was going to be considered witchcraft and pagan. And I was in a group at the time called The Christian Herbalists. I don't know if it still exists, but I definitely don't think you should be like the anything, especially like the herbalist or the Christian herbalist. But anyway, I was a part of the group, and I just put out there, would anybody like be interested in talking about plant communication, like if it's possible or not? So I hadn't experienced it. I didn't know if it was possible, good, bad. Within 24 hours, I was kicked out of the group. There was a huge flurry inside the group. And they said that I was a witch, a diviner, a creature worshiper, that I was like worshiping plants instead of God. And that word is very, full for a lot of us. But what I told the leader of the group at the time, as the pastor of a very conservative Christian church, is I said, that's not what's happening with me at all when I'm with the plants. They're like portals. And instead of putting the divine into a box, it just opens it up. And it just becomes like, could it really be this wonderful? Could it really be this amazing? So it was really actually very expansive for me. And I felt, to be honest with you, the spiritual aspect, because some of this that we're touching on is more religion than spiritual, is it's just centered me more in my heart. The connection is much stronger than it ever was. And I think that that's possible for anyone who works with the plants, especially if there's that intention of tapping into the emotional, spiritual, sort of intangible part. That was a lot, Tara.
I think it's wonderfully described because I've certainly experienced it as far as, each plant and plant medicine is unique. And it's like getting to know different people, right? They're a person, but each one is so unique. And the way you described it, and I can see it also. It's just really well put. It's really hard to put into words. And I think you described it really well. And I personally, while I do have my own, I do believe in Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. And I believe that God puts amazing things on this earth to help us connect with God, and including the plants. And I have definitely experienced healing above all with God but through the plants are an amazing resource, and certainly to not be overlooked. And so I think you described really beautifully how they're each kind of a unique way there, and to remember that part of you that's so easily lost as we reincarnate.
Yes, and I wrote a poem once, and it's a very short little poem. It's like a couplet, and I'm still not going to be able to remember it, completely. But basically, it said, "Why didn't you just let me sit with trees? Because I had learned more from sitting with trees than I ever had in a sermon." And I didn't mean that to belittle the sermons that I've heard, because as you know, I was raised in the church, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, vacation Bible school, Christian school, revivals. I was married to a pastor for almost 20 years, family worship, private worship, all these things. But something opened up in my heart when I began to connect with the plants that just for me, it wasn't found in the sermons or the human voices. And I think part of it for me has been, we're really going some unexpected places with this Tulip Poplar conversation beginning. I think part of it is all of those ways of connecting give us a mediator, a human mediator here and now. And that's just, we don't need it. That's not the case. Human mediation isn't needed. It doesn't mean that we can't gather things from human teachers or from speakers or books or whatever. But part of being with the plants helps me tap into that for me directly.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was incredibly important to learn to listen to my own heart, and the still small voice that's in my own heart, and the divine voice speaking directly to me. I remember when I was really starting to open up with this world of plant communication and Tulip Poplar at this time too. And actually, my husband at the time, he had resigned from being a pastor, not because he wanted to talk with plants. He doesn't talk to plants, but the church had just disintegrated, and it was really sad. Like, it just crumbled in his health, and it was time. It was the end of it. And so we moved, and I was able to just not be a pastor's wife, and I could just be Amanda, at least, as to the degree I could at that time. And a friend of mine created a labyrinth, and I was walking the labyrinth in my backyard at the time, and I was thinking about everything that was happening to me, how I was hearing the voice of the plants while also feeling closer to God, to Jesus, to the divine than I ever had before, but also realizing that this was making people uncomfortable, that the church was not approving it, that my pastor partner at the time was not approving of it. And yet I knew what I knew. It's this idea of gnosis that some people might be familiar of, like this knowing that's immediate. It's like we hear stories in the church of recant, the Reformation recanting, and you cannot recant what is in your heart. You cannot recant what you know with a GN. You can recant what's in your head, but you can't recant what's in your heart. So I was walking the labyrinth praying and just trying to open my heart up to, what is happening to me? Because I just feel very true and good about these things, and yet the mediator voices are not happy. And this psalm came into my mind, a psalm by the psalmist David. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path as I'm walking the labyrinth. And I realized that I had always been taught that verse, thy word is a lamp unto my feet, that thy word was the Bible, the written canon, the 66 books that the church has approved. And that's not necessarily not the case. But what I realized was when David wrote those words, the 66 books in the canon did not exist, and the church councils had not approved these books. So what did he mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And for me, I was like, the Spirit of God speaking to him in other ways. There are other ways of knowing. and some people would use the word, the Holy Spirit, but these other ways of knowing that are possible. And in the Bible, we get examples of, donkeys, snakes, burning bushes. Jesus says, if you don't praise me, the rocks are going to cry out. So he's either a liar or that's going to happen, or it doesn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're taking an odd course.
What did Tulip Poplar speak to you? Because it was very pivotal in your healing journey and has been since, correct?
Yeah, it still is. So the first interaction I had with Tulip Poplar, you've heard, some others may have as well. But when I first sat with the tree, it was the first tree that I ever communicated with, and it was a younger tree. I won't go into that story right now, but the younger tree spoke first, and then it directed me to an older tree. It was basically saying, you need to go to the older tree because what you need to know is not here, like with me. So I walked further down this creek, and before I ever got to that tree, I could just feel it. I felt it. I knew I was coming near it. And even now, when I remember it, in my mind's eye, it's this huge giant of a tree, right? It's just almost otherworldly in its, height and girth. But I don't think it was really like that. It's just how it felt. And the phrase that I felt, that I heard, was impenetrable fortress, which I didn't at the time think the tree was saying it to me, but it was the way the tree felt to me. And that phrase has been unpacking now for almost a decade, because what I came to realize, as you've heard me say, is it's not the tree. Well, it is, but it's me. The impenetrable fortress was me and is me, and still in many different ways. And then also at that same time, a few weeks later, I stood between the two trees. I tell the story in the book, Flowers for a Girl. And at that time, I had not begun to remember what happened to me when I was small. And at that time, I still had a relationship, a very good relationship with my mom. And but at that story, the tulip poplar lifted me up, the two trees between them, and sort of swung me back and forth like a little girl, and they were like my parents looking down at me, and they loved me, and they were happy, and we were all laughing. And they said to me, we will be your parents. And I thought, this is so beautiful. And I felt really honored and like humbled, and like, this is amazing to have trees offer to be my parents. But at the time I thought, but I don't really need them. But the tulip poplar is an oracle tree as well as the parent tree. So it could see, it knew, what was coming. And so I've also been unpacking that phrase for all this time too.
The impenetrable fortress?
The impenetrable fortress, and we will be your parents. What it means for tulip poplar to have offered to be my parents.
What have been some of those meanings that have really stood out to you?
Well, a few years after that, when things had started to unravel, when I was in the thick of remembering, and at this point, I'm not sure if my mom had not left yet, but you know how it's going to happen, you know it's coming. And I was with Tulip Poplar, and I wanted answers, give me answers. And Tulip Poplar has a way of not speaking until it's time. And that's, Matt calls it the Jesus tree for those who feel unforgivable. But I told Matt it's also the Jesus tree because it's like you ask it a question and then it answers you, but that's not what you asked. But Tulip Poplar's like, but that's what you need to hear, with Jesus and his parables and his stories. So this particular evening, it wasn't answering me. It was very quiet, because tulip poplar can be quiet if it chooses, and teaches us how to be patient and wait. So I got up, I tell the story in the book, and I stomped off like a petulant little 3-year-old having a temper tantrum. And I just said, fine, if you don't want to talk to me, fine, I'll just leave. And I did. I stomped off like a little child. And then I felt it sort of like tap me on the shoulder and be like, okay, turn around. So I turned around, and like I knew I did not want to hear what it was going to say. I knew it was right. I knew I should have just gone home. But it said it would tell me one thing. that night. And what it said to me was, after saying, "We will be your parents," it said, "We are for children who have no parents." And like that hit me in the gut and the heart, like my whole being. And like I remember my head just sort of fell down, like my chin onto my chest. And I just shook my head. And I said, "Thank you." And I said, "You're right. That's enough. I don't want to hear anything else." Because I knew what that meant for myself. And I think my soul knew how that was going to unpack the next 10 years in a wider story. So part of what Tulip Poplar has been for me is just that. Like it's stood in very real ways that maybe we'll get into. I don't know. Um, as a parent for me, I'll say to people, it's for the parents we wish we were and we wish we had, like that we wish our parents had been. And so through the Tulip Poplar, it began to teach me, and I began to experience the love of a mother, the love of a father, unconditional love, love that encourages, love that is happy for you and sees you, and love that protects you, and all these sorts of ways. And it also began to help me be more that way with my own children, because sadly, as you know, we usually parent the way we've been parented, or we're usually working out, sadly, our trauma on our poor little beings because the work's not been done, you know? And so Tulip Poplar began to help me shift that. And it began to teach me and show me and like tend to the wounds that had to do with the mother and the father and parenting and children and all of those relationships. And it also began to teach me, and this is very important, blue heron medicine, which sometimes I'll say part of Blue Heron's medicine is she who knows how to stand alone. And this was a phrase my friend Rebecca Dawn from Mulberry Mud, she's really lovely. She just sent me a feather one day, kind of random, before all this started, with just a little piece of paper that had that phrase on it. And I thought, what's this for? And I was getting ready to find out. But part of it is growing up, this codependency that we can have as children with our parents, especially if things have gotten stunted along the way, which they often are, with trauma, abuse, or even just like run of the mill mistakes, that parents make. And so beginning to, yes, be a daughter, but grow up and let go of some of the codependencies that we can have with our parents, especially if there's like trauma and abuse involved, because it sort of amplifies that. And be able to stand on your own, be full grown like a tulip poplar and stand tall. So that's a beginning with starting to play that out. Oh, I hear a little person. Maybe
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's our old kitty
Oh,
coming in to announce herself and then
I
leaving.
love it.
So it sounds like, Tulip Poplar being the parent, you spent a lot of time together. And it sounds like it was the parent in the sense of like giving lessons, sharing the lifelong wisdom you would hope to get from a wise parent. But you don't have that history, you don't have the trauma, and it's the Jesus tree, right? So you get the parables, but you don't have the history to be like, well, I guess you did pout, but you don't have. It's not the same as a human interaction. Is that what you mean by parenting? It was a parent to you? Those conversations, that listening, that relationship?
Mm-hmm. I'm deciding how far I want to take this, but part of it is just in a practical way. Like when I was going through my separation and divorce, I couldn't go to my mom.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't go to my dad. I couldn't, and this is probably partly why my former husband was like, "This has got to end." Partly, not the whole thing, but I would go and sit with this tree. I mean, I'd walk out the door of the house and go a few yards over and sit with the tree for counsel, or to just be sad. right? Or to just be seen, or just be accepted. And this tree, that's part of its medicine. It's unconditional love, completely unconditional love. And everything is forgivable because part of what Tulip Poplar teaches, we've talked about before, is there's actually not anything to forgive if we transcend and lift out. And this idea of like, no matter what you do or don't do or don't say or who you, I am so happy to see you. And I love you so much. And being with you gives me so much joy. You see, this way that we don't often have, like our human parents, and I am a human parent, we're human. Well, a lot of us are still just kind of growing up, and it's hard for us sometimes to really be fully present the way that our children need and would desire, or to not be triggered ourselves by things they're saying or doing, to be able to just be completely delighted regardless of what they're saying, or doing, to just see the divine light in them and not be overtaken by our own fear. So it's just a really lovely plant for helping us do that, work through what happened with our parents and shift the type of parenting that we are going to have and we're going to experience. So the counsel was there, the protection was there, the acceptance was there, just all the things we wish. I had a client the other day. We had a session, and she said she was trying to think, because of some things that were going on with her children, what would my little self have wanted? What would my little self have wanted at this age and this time? And what came to her was just to sit here and be with me, just hold me. Like, you're not upset about what I say, you're not scared by what I say. You're just present, you're just holding me, and you're just here. And that's a huge part of Tulip Poplar's medicine, is presence, which is especially lovely, especially in connection to when we're experiencing trauma and abuse, or other things in those relationships, when we've been abandoned. We've been abandoned and we've been neglected, and our parents are gone. I write about this in my book. I had this dream when I was little. It stood out so much. And I'm not going to go into the details because it's all there. But basically, in the dream, I kept being in different locations with my parents, and then they would walk in opposite directions away from me, and I would be left there without them. And when I told my parents that dream the next morning, they looked at me with this sort of, surprise look on their face. I think it was in elementary school, early elementary school. And they told me at that moment that, and this was kind of unusually and tapped in for my parents to even acknowledge the dream mattered and respond the way they did. They said, we think maybe you're having that dream because maybe you're picking up on the fact that we might get a divorce. And they did get a divorce, but not for many, many, many years later. And that probably was part of it, but there was other ways that I ended up just literally being left alone, And so that's also a huge part of its medicine, is to just be present. It's not leaving, it's not going anywhere. It's a tree.
I remember you talking about, well, you went to this event. Where was it? Was it Yale or something like, what was it? That campus?
I don't know what the story is. I did go to Yale, but
yeah. So there was the 2 tulip poplars, and you mentioned in a previous podcast that it was like the grandparents escorting you in, wasn't it? You equated tulip poplar as also like grandparents, right?
Yeah, the grandparents aspect. Yeah, and Yale's sort of a curious story. There's 2 tulip poplar trees, obviously intentionally planted right outside the gates of the divinity school. So, and I thought that's incredible, because whoever planted them, chances are, probably wasn't tapped into them like the way we're talking about it. But still, we know, right? We know. So, and a lot of people I sit with, clients and students, will pick up on temples, columns, worship when they sit with Tulip Poplar. So it's really interesting. But anyway, yes, grandparents came from when I started to remember what had happened, it was very disorienting, as might be imagined. And part of that was I never even had an inkling. Like I never even thought for a second. And in retrospect, I realized it was kind of this Pollyannish, view of my childhood. And that was one of the things my former partner said to my parents of why he believed me, besides like what in the world, was that he said Amanda has never said anything bad about her childhood. Everything she says is good and positive. So the fact that suddenly this is here, it's not like she's been sitting around for years trying to think up something, to say. But it was very disorienting, and I was just looking for some sort of help, and I had these herbal books, and it was Susan Weed's book, Down Under, that I had mentioned before. And of course, from the title, she's dealing with reproductive herbs and medicines, the womb, um, sexuality. So I opened the book up, and all the way down at the bottom of her contents page, there was like the last chapter was trauma. And so I opened it up, and she will often begin sections and chapters of her book with her speaking like the plant would speak. The plant is speaking at this time. And she began the chapter on trauma with the grandmother and the grandfather tree talking to you about how this isn't your fault and you don't have to be angry. And it was the way she paired them, the grandparents, and the way they were talking to the child was just almost a mirror image of what I experienced that day with Tulip Poplar when they said, "We will be your parents." So it really was a way of confirming for me like this presence of parents, grandparents, but this idea of, caretakers, because I'll say Tulip Poplar is a caretaker for the caretakers, and a lot of times when we've had these sorts of things happen to us when we're small or even when we're older, that's part of the wound, is that no one was there to protect us. No one took care of us, right? We were alone in some capacity, if not completely. And so it offered this medicine of parents, grandparents, caretakers being present and not finding any fault in you, just and not, this is a no blemish in you. That's a Bible way of putting it, but because you can just feel so dirty, so for these parents, grandparents, even if they're trees or spirit beings, to look down and still love you and still think you're just as adorable and sweet as you were before, any of this happened.
When you speak of the unconditional love, I see that, or at least in my experience with my grandmother, at least, that feels especially true of grandparents. Like parents, they're busy dealing with life, and there are just times it's like, I need you to go over there so I can do this, right? Where
Yeah.
grandparents usually carve out the time, and they're like, you're sweet as honey no matter what. And, just it's a different relationship. And so I can see the application of the grandparent trees, especially.
I've also often with Tulip Poplar felt the grandparent energy, grandmother, and sometimes I've also felt like an aunt, however people want to pronounce it, or some sort of older matronly presence, right? So, even if it's not our mom or our grandmothers in particular, just those sorts of individuals in our lives who, like you said, they always have time for you. Like Tulip Poplar, bless its heart. I mean, over the last decade or more, I have sat with that tree, I don't know, hundreds, I mean, thousands, I mean, honestly, of times. I have asked the same questions over and over and over again. I've cried about the same things. I've asked the same thing. And it never gets mad at me. It never gets impatient. It never rolls its eyes. It's never tired of seeing me. And, people may say, well, I experienced this with, this plant or that plant. Probably so. Hope so. But there's just this real delight that I always feel with Tulip Poplar, and I feel that it helps like restore that in us, that we are delightful, that we are lovable, and then helps us also to communicate it to others, like our delight in them. Like I tell my kids, I have six, so I have three older ones, three younger ones. There's 5 years between the two groups. My oldest, he's going to be 21 in September. My youngest is 8. So I'm just letting you know the span.
Mhm.
And I started to remember these things and make these shifts and changes with the plants in the in between, right? Because it was the miscarriages that occasioned, tapping into these other forms of medicine and just examining myself, my life. But here's something I do with my younger three, and it's not even, I never thought I'm going to start saying this to them. It just started coming out of my mouth like years ago. And I didn't do it with my older three, at least not in any way that flowed like this. It was probably more like an intentional time or two. It makes me sad. And with the younger ones, I mean, maybe it's every day. If it's not, it's close. It might be more than once a day. I will just say to them, I'm so glad I'm your mom. I'm so glad I get to be your mom. I love being your mom. I'm going to get to it. And I mean it. And I mean it. And, you know, we could attribute it to whatever, I suppose, but for myself, I really believe it's because of the work I've done with Tulip Poplar. It's been changing my heart. It's an instrument of changing my heart, of tuning my heart. Um, Not only to the mothering and the child, although it's very specific and it's real, but also just seeing their little souls, these little soul beings, that are here, and I love you, and like it's an honor to be your mom, and it's delightful. So this is a real shift, and I would love to have heard that myself, you know, when I was younger, because I don't know about everybody else, although I'm sure there are people who share it. I didn't I want to be careful saying this because I'm not saying it's just my mom, but I mean, it's a lot of just not feeling lovable or likable. I mean, I was told plainly, you are hard to love. I was told, like, there's got to be a pretty girl in there somewhere, but she didn't sound like she believed it. Um, so it was just different, and I want to say, like, I'd probably be a really different person if I'd heard that while I was growing up. But I also might not have needed to meet Tulip Poplar, which I'm really glad I did. But that's part of its medicine too, just this delight that it can have.
Do you ever wonder who you would have been if you hadn't had all this plant medicine to help you along?
Yeah.
How do you think what's the
Honest,
difference?
yeah, Tara. I mean, I don't want to be dramatic, and I'm not dramatic actually. Um, I don't really think I would be here. I really don't. I'm not really sure that I would be alive, because there were times where I really did want to die, and not a little bit. Like, I don't know if I ever would have been like, I don't know if this is the way you should word it, but this is how I think of it, brave enough to do anything about it. But I hated being here. I hated being a pastor's wife. I did. Sorry, everybody. It's hard. Those of you who are pastor's wives, like, if you want to send me an email and say, thank you so much for saying that, or maybe you don't want to say that, but you can come to me and say, I hate it. This is so awful. I just hated it. And I I was so squelched. I was so silenced. And part of that was my fault, if we want to put fault anywhere. I'm not really into fault with people. I don't know another way to word it. I participated in that, of like being silenced. I was so unhappy. But if I was still here, I would be very unhappy. I don't think I would laugh very much, and I don't mean this negative towards anybody else. I'm saying that by myself. I'd be a horrible mother. I would. I'd be repeating what my mom did, but probably more, because I've got more kids than her, and it's just more. There's just more. There's just more stress, more time, more responsibility. I could be wrong about all this. I mean, maybe I'd be amazing. But honestly, I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, I was doing fine when I found the plants, and there were plenty of people who thought I was wonderful and great. But I mean, I guess, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if I would have had the stamina to keep moving. Like, it was time for a shift. Like, Matt talks about wolf medicine, that right angle, change or die. And that's definitely where I was at. Like, and I remember saying to my former partner at the time, because of some stuff that was going on in the church, I sort of had this little outburst. And I said, I can't do this for 50 more years. Like, I'll just die if I have to do this for 50 more years. And I said it with so much passion that it almost felt like prophetic. And I remember I like slammed my hands over my mouth, like, because I felt like I had just like spoken something into existence because I was so passionate about what I said. Um, but I meant it. So, you know, I just feel like my time with the plants, and especially Tulip Poplar, but violet, rose, chamomile, these are some of my allies that you talk about. Blueberry, you know, these are my allies. Um, they just transformed me. It's just revolutionized me. And I, you know, part of what I want to say about that, because I think this can be true for anybody, and this is part of what I love about the plants. And this is what Tulip Poplar is for me. I found myself again. I just lost myself. You know, like, it wasn't that the Amanda that I was miserable and awful and this, that, or the other. It was that I just was like, where did I go? Like, in the midst of like what my parents expect or don't expect, what the church people expect or don't expect, what my husband expects or doesn't expect, what my kids expect, da, 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 da. Where did I go? Where am I? I remember I've told the story of, you know, Rosemary Gladstar and her, at the time, correspondence course on herbalism. And I never finished it. I didn't even start the first lesson. I didn't even complete the first lesson off of the Rosemary Gladstar course because the first question was, tell us about yourself. And at the time, I just, you know, you started out giving yourself labels, but none of those labels is who I am. And I just thought, who am I? And that's what the plants help me do. And that's what Tulip Poplar especially has helped me do. It's like, Amanda, this is who you are. This attribute and that attribute. You know, we haven't even gotten into all this stuff about like the heart of Tulip Poplar and all these things. It's like, this is who you are. And this is why you're here. Um, and I think that's a lovely part of the plants for us is to find that like divine spark inside of us that, you know, never goes out, but it can sure get covered up with everything else.
There are a couple of things that come to mind, and I imagine myself listening to this, not knowing this aspect of plants, and I try to put myself in that person's shoes, right? And going, wow, because you have that inner inkling, right? When you're like, I need to get to know myself. I need myself to come out. But at the same time, you're afraid because everybody's gotten used to you being the person that they know and expect you to be. And I think a part of you knows that things are going to really shift.
Yes.
I, for example, heard, you know, you're so positive, you're negative. Like what I was, and the shifts that I made was foreign to one of my parents, and literally was disowned. But a part of you is also like, I can't not be this way. And correct me if I'm wrong, but so I also imagine at the same time, I'm not a person, if I'm listening to this and have gone through similar but very different experience, is I don't want to be that woman who's like proverbially kind of tearing off her clothes and just like running through the streets and like, this is the new me and you have to accept me no matter what, you know, and just like, you know, burning up relationships, and I'm exaggerating, but
And not.
and not because it's also like that. I know that's not me, but there's this inner me that needs to grow. Like it's grown inside, like speaking of trees, right? It's the tree's roots that are underneath the cement or the tar, and they're just like ready to bust out, right? But you're afraid of like that total busting out. Like you said, you claimed, I just can't do this for another 15 years, and then cover up. How would you say that? I mean, was there a time period where there was kind of like that, proverbially, not literally, tearing off the clothes and just like becoming, this is the new me, take it or leave it? Or was it kind of gradual? Just like,
That's like, where do I want to take this? Okay, first, okay, this is so funny. Okay, first, part of Tulip Poplar's medicine is it's given me this phrase over the years: get bigger. This now didn't tell me that right away because I wouldn't have been able to hear that right away. But when I was ready, when I could hear it, even if I wasn't ready to do it, get bigger. Because the fact is, we all are. Every single one of us is enormous. I mean, just enormous, eternal. Like it's an eternal soul. I was going to say, for God's sake, that's kind of funny, But it's infinite. Like it's uncontainable. Okay, so get bigger. And then, as you've heard me mention, rainbow dragon, the dragon medicine. Dragon's huge. Dragon's enormous. Well, they didn't talk to me about rainbow dragons at the beginning. That grew over time until the dragon medicine, just enormous, right? And I'm still not as big. I'm still not expressing as big as I am or as I will. I'm still not completely, unveiled like as the dragon, but this is part of its medicine because like that's the beauty of it. Our parents or people, not all our parents, but it can happen with parents or people who are like in that superior capacity, over us kind of thing. If you get bigger, like you're not very controllable, and also like, what if you outshine me, which is not going to happen if we were all just doing it, so it's like, stay small, stay small, stay small, stay small, stay small. So Tulip Poplar, get bigger, this rainbow dragon energy. Okay, so the process, it was a process. Now, there may be people who disagree with what I'm getting ready to say, but what I will say about it is it was my experience. Like I lived it, and I lived it as consciously and intentionally as I could. And I really mean that, because it can be really easy to like not be conscious and intentional when you're going through these kinds of shifts. It like you said, you just throw, what do they say, caution to the wind, right? And you break everything, and it all just has to be broken. Okay, I really didn't want to break everything. I didn't want to break anything, right? So I was very conscious and intentional, and that doesn't mean perfect. And a lot of what got broken because honestly, the response of people outside of me, it wasn't, and I'm not saying that to say that it wasn't connected to things I was doing or not doing, but there was a lot of reaction, if that makes sense, a lot of reaction. One of the lovely things about the plants that I tell people when it comes to like, especially violet, that medicine of like, say what you need to say, or tulip poplar and get bigger, is they are loving. They are loving. So none of the ways that they offer shifts and changes are going to be like, instructions to be destructive or harmful. All of these things are meant to come from a place of love. All of them. And they help us do it. That's what I tell people with violet. They're like, oh, you don't want me to say what I need to say, because they think if I say it, I'll just spew venom on everybody and, burn the place down. Yes, and that's why you need violet, so that you can say it in a violet way, in a loving way. That doesn't mean things won't burn down. And it doesn't mean people won't like what you say. It just means that you will know that you said it from a place of like love and truth. So I did try to do that. But there was a moment in there. That's why I laughed, because there was a moment in there that I probably got as close to what you just said as I could, living in like the upstate of South Carolina with 6 kids and the Bible Belt. I mean, you can only go so far, you know what I'm saying? But what was so funny when you said that too is, let's see, mm, over a decade ago, I don't remember how long, it's been a long time, like, maybe getting closer to 15 years or something. When I had just started studying herbalism, I had a ginger root on my countertop. And sometimes they'll look like little, men or gingerbread. They've got like a shape to them. So it was laying on my countertop, and I had all these other herbs chopped up because you want to make everything, try everything. So my then husband came home, and he opened the door and he walked into the kitchen, and there's like, plant matter all over the counter, and then there's this root, that looks like this little creature. And he says to me, "What is this?" And so he said, "It's ginger, blah blah blah," or whatever. And he said to me, and he was joking, but he wasn't. He said, "Okay," and I said, "I'm just making, it's like a salve or something, I don't know." And he said, "Okay, just I don't want you to like get naked and dance around a fire with this." And like, all these years later, right as like I didn't know, but it was like right at the cusp of everything getting ready to shift and change. I didn't dance naked around a fire. I hate to disappoint everyone, but I was around a fire singing with some women, and it was just earthy and good. And I was just, that's the best way to put it, earthy. I had just started to be in my body because I hadn't been in it for a long, long time because of things that had happened. And I was in my body, and I could feel my body, and I could sing, and maybe I would dance even if clothed, or these kinds of things. And like, one of my friends who knew the story, she jokingly said, "We got a fire. You could always, like it could happen, But I will say, along those lines, I did things that I had never done before, and that they wouldn't have approved of. So, for instance, I went skinny dipping, and some people maybe think that's bad. I don't know. It was just wonderful. I'd never done it before because, like, the body's bad and you have to have it covered. But, like, I'm literally, like, just out here with, like, a lake. It's not like there's a crowd of people or something, and it was just becoming comfortable with being human, becoming comfortable with having a body, even becoming comfortable with sexuality. And a lot of that is like our culture, it is the institutions, it is religion, but it is also the trauma where it's just dirty and it's filthy, and you should be ashamed of it, and all this sort of stuff. And that's been a lovely part of this journey of this incarnation, which that's a word I do. I like to use it, especially with Tulip Poplar, just this tree of incarnation of and it loves that you're human, and it wants you to love that you're human, and it wants you to love the beautiful things about being human. So I've told this story how that first time with Matt, when everybody was like, "You got it wrong, Amanda," and Matt was like, "That's enough. It's teaching Amanda something else." What everybody was saying in class that day was, "Tulip Poplar loves humans. Oh, Tulip Poplar loves humans. It just loves humans. Tulip Poplar loves humans." And of course, that's not what I got. I got the impenetrable fortress race. But all these years later, yes, it does. And it's like, and I want you to love humans too. And I want you to love being human, because this is what the divine has made you to be. So I never ran down the street naked saying, "Burn it all to the ground." And part of that, I will say, is because of my children. Because my children have been very grounding for me, which I probably needed. And they have needed me to be as present and responsible as I possibly could be, while, you know, enjoying being human, while entering back into the wildness. But some people might think that I have gone a little far with some things, but I don't know. I think that I think overall I've done well because I tried to do it still. Like I was constantly saying, is this loving? Is this what you want me to do? Is this to be with God? Is this what it looks like to be? Excuse me. Always like coming back to center, asking the questions again.
That I wrote down the word intention. I
Mhm.
think what that is such good, well, I'll put in quotes, advice, just sharing from your experience. That what brought to mind is when you talked about your husband saying, now are you going to be dancing around the fire, with this herb? And there's a difference. So it's like when you need to cry, you may need to cry, but sometimes, how like when you're with a friend and you're crying or about ready to cry, or you've cried a bit, and then you laugh about something, and it's almost the same. Like the resulting feeling is just as much relief, like shaking your body.
Mhm.
And so it's like your body, your consciousness has a couple of ways of releasing and processing. It could have been crying, and maybe you actually needed to laugh more, but you couldn't, right? You couldn't tap into that, just speaking from experience too. Or similarly, like, I'm not going to assume that you know what this is like, but I know every once in a while when I'm really frustrated, I go through a stompy feet mode. And it feels great. Like I just need to like ground myself and shake myself. But then I've thought, well, what if you had just danced?
Yes.
Right? That's similar to the crying and laughing,
Yes.
stomping your feet out of frustration. Or what if you had just danced?
Yes. Yes. I have a beautiful story, a beautiful Tulip Poplar story about this. So when I was growing up, we weren't allowed to dance. So I was raised in like a conservative Baptist church, and I went to a small Christian school, and we weren't even allowed to have school dances. We had banquets, so we would get dressed up, we could eat good food, it was decorated, and we had a speaker, which was basically the equivalent of a preacher again, and we couldn't dance, and we just begged my senior year, the English teacher, Miss Greer, who was just she was a lovely woman, like she was such a good, lovely woman. But we begged her to let us have a dance. And she got so much fear, like in her eyes. And she was like, oh no. Oh, and she was like fanning herself, literally. And we were like, Mrs. Greer. She was like, oh. And she told us about when she had taught in public schools in like the 60s or something. And she was like, they were fornicating in the hallways. And she, like, it was like a flashback for her. And she was like traumatized all over again. I was like, okay, we're not going to fornicate in the hallways. That's the word she used. Sorry. We're not going to fornicate in the hallways, Miss Greer. We just want to dance. But it was a no go. So we didn't have it. And it wasn't, we just weren't allowed. So my freshman year of college, I went to my first dance. I wasn't even planning on going because I just didn't even have an inkling for it. My roommate was like, you have to go. And I was like, well, whatever. She's like, here, put this dress on. You're going. So I went to my first dance. It was so fun. Nothing was bad, and no one fornicated in the hallways. And I wasn't at a Christian school either, And I went to church the next morning, and I remember sitting in church rubbing my feet because they were so sore, and I was so happy. Well, anyways, there wasn't much dancing after that. But sometimes when I would be in church over the years, I wouldn't want to dance, because you feel things in your heart, right? You feel things. You want to dance because you're happy. You want to dance because, you're just expressing. But as you can imagine, head coverings, no musical instruments, psalmody, blah, blah, blah. They're definitely not going to dance because you can't even say like amen there. Like at least in the Baptist church, you could say amen or something. You can't do anything. But I just wanted to so badly. And I just started to really just want to dance, and especially to dance like the Bible says with David before the Lord, because it was like, sure, you could dance in a dance hall, or sure, you could dance at a school dance, or you could dance in your living room. Okay, maybe you get away with that. But like, it was like the most forbidden thing, really, would be to dance like before God, like in church or something. So I remember this was, again, right at the cusp of everything, shifting and changing. I was out in this open field behind the house I was living in at the time. And I wasn't a pastor's wife anymore per se. He'd resigned, but, we were still married, but he wasn't like pastoring anything at the time. And I was just at Tulip Poplars. And, if you ever see their leaves, they do this. And, a lot of times I'll say they're waving, they're beckoning, they're waving, but they're dancing, So I was standing there with the Tulip Poplars and I was listening to this song. What is the title of it? I really like this song. Is it 100 million times? Some people are going to know that Christian song. It's such a beautiful song. And I was out on this open field, and like Tulip Poplar was literally like with its leaves and its branches and with the communication having, come on, come on, and it would be like, I'm getting chills thinking about it. It'd be like, move your arm like this. Now move your arm like that. Now, what if you took your foot and stepped this way? Now, what if you took your foot and stepped this way? And then suddenly I was in the field, which for some people this is normal. It was not for me at the time. And I'm in this field, behind my house in this neighborhood, dancing with these big motions that I'd never danced with before. And I felt in my heart that I was dancing with and for and to the divine with Tulip Poplar, saying, here, I will show you, how to dance. And it wasn't too long after that, I was in church. Yes, I was. And this particular church, which wasn't my husband at the time's favorite, but it was like make do with the shifts. They had this big open space in the back behind all the pews. I don't know why. I don't know what that was for. It's an older church building. And I just couldn't stay in place anymore. And so I just went to the back and I just spun around in circles and I moved my hands and I did the thing. And it just feels so good to like dance because you know what? There's nothing wrong with it. Like you said, what is the intention? My intention was gratitude. My intention was love. My intention was worship. My intention was presence. My intention was communion. My intention was just joy. This is my intention. You know what I'm saying? Whatever the moves, however I might be moving, that's my intention. And so Tulip Poplar was very much for me about dance. And part of that was to be in the body, to move the body. And you're right. Like sometimes I might feel like stomping or kicking or whatever, you know what I'm saying? But the dance, even if it's not as like fluid as I'm giving, if it's more, growly expression, to move the body. And part of that Tulip Poplar medicine too was freedom. I felt so free. And I got up again and again, made people so mad, and I just kept getting up because like I'm free. And this is part of Tulip Poplar medicine, wild Mustang. You were born free. You were born free. So you get to choose whenever you decide to act like it. You know what I'm saying? And that's another reason I told Matt that it's the Jesus tree besides unforgivable is that passage from Isaiah, setting captives free. So many things hold us captive. So many things, people, situations, memories, events, institutions, places. But to really just tap into like our innate, is that the word? Freedom. So that was part of it too, and is just finding freedom in the dance and freedom in movement and freedom from all these people like judgments and expectations because I'm not really doing anything bad.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to show some pictures of Tulip Poplar. If you're in the way north like me, this doesn't grow natively. It might find it in the warmer city where it gets this city climatic climate, warmth of climate. Share with us some of the signatures that you think are really significant or that stand out to you.
Wow. Oh gosh, there's so many. Well, one of it, oh gosh, where do we even start? Well, we could start with the flower. So it looks like a cup, like that one picture is really good there at the bottom, like a golden cup. So a lot of times what Tulip Poplar wants to say, since we've been talking about incarnation, this idea of the cup, is the sacred vessel. Like you are the sacred vessel. You are the Holy Grail. You can hold divinity. Like it can feel you. So this idea of this golden cup, this like holy grail. But also, if you look at it, if you look at the edges of those petals, you see the orange that's there. So you've got like the yellow, but you've also got the orange down there. You can see it. If you look at it, it looks like a little campfire when you're up close to it. And a lot of times, what it's wanted to talk to me about is to tend the fire.
Mm.
To tend the fire. And that can mean so many things. Like, see, you can see it really well on that picture there where there's like a bunch of them. But, creative fire, the home, the hearth, so many things about tending that inner fire. Yeah, there we go. It's so, so lovely, so beautiful. I love those cups. Also, I have a great picture of tulip poplar with those flowers where it's catching the light. And
Mm.
it's almost like it catches it from the back and then like it goes forward. So there's a lot of medicine there with the light of the world, emanating light, being filled with light, the origin and source of light. The leaves, honestly, Tara, we could have multiple conversations just about the leaves because if you look at a tulip poplar, they're very distinctive leaves. But as it grows, they take all sorts of different shapes. So you can see all sorts of different sort of doctrine of signatures in them. So one is they often look like hands, waving, but also bear paws or deer hooves or fox faces because it has fox medicine or angel wings. Or some people, it's called a fiddle tree because it looks like the shape of the fiddle or the lyre, for music. So you can go down all these roads with like the animal medicine that's being expressed there with bear, with deer, with fox, the angelic medicine, that you can see there. The seeds with the dagger that you get, just enormous amounts of medicine in the dagger and the seed. There we go. And part of that is the blue heron medicine, but also I've been tapping into a Cherokee story of Spearfinger and the connection between the Cherokee story of Spearfinger and the dagger and tulip poplar medicine. I mean, honestly, like I can and I will talk about this tree for the rest of my life and find ways to write about it and talk about it because it's like this endless between the flower, the leaves, the bark, the seeds. Like, how about this? How about this? How about this? How about that? And that's part of the blue heron medicine too, is like it's shape shifting. Because now let's talk about this part of me. Now let's talk about this part of me. Now let's talk about this part of you. But the yellow is also connected to solar plexus. So I am the will, the liver gallbladder, um, very much decisiveness, and like strength. It's a heart medicine through and through. Like we really haven't got to go that, but it's a heart medicine through and through. But part of what it wants to say about the heart is with that yellow and orange is a golden heart. And so part of it is like the solar plexus and the heart really united in a way that gives a lot of like courage. Like there's so much courage. It has lion medicine. Some of it's shown me. It's really just so lovely. I don't know, Tara. I could keep going, but you get the idea. Like to me, this tree is what I call a world tree. A lot of times you put world trees like in old Europe, places like that, or places in South America. But I think for us here, this is a world tree for us that has all sorts of animals and its branches and its flowers. And it's like one story after another. It once told me, I've given you a cosmology, Amanda. It's like you can just unpack like everything, I think, like through the lens of this tree.
A whole cosmology. Wow.
Yes. I know, right? I know. That's why I just, I think sometimes I annoy certain people, which I'm kind of used to for various reasons. But one of the new reasons I annoy people is because they're thinking, "Oh gosh, she's going to say something about tulip poplar again." And you know what? I am. That's what I'm going to do. Because why not? Because it's beautiful and it keeps having more and more things to say and it keeps unpacking more and more and more. And for me, it's a beautiful lens. through which to see the world. And so I really like it. So as you know, I call myself the Liriodendrous, the human embodiment of the tulip poplar tree, which has come to mean even more than it meant when I first made that word up. So I just think I'm going to keep doing it. And that's another part of its medicine too is, it once told me not everyone can see your light. So you've heard me tell stories of like this man that I met who he said he hated tulip poplar. He was in one of my classes because he said, it just drops its old dirty blooms everywhere. And I was like, oh, this poor man. Like he's never seen like one of the fresh yellow cups. And part of the medicine that came through that day as I was listening to him, we were sitting in class, was not everybody can see your light. Not everybody wants to. And, you're not for everyone. Tulip poplar is not for everyone. But that's part of something too is like we can really feel like our light gets dimmed. We can feel that way, because of events that happen in life or even things we do to ourselves. But it's a beautiful tree that's like, no, you're really bright. And sometimes you can't even see it. So it's like, let me help you see. Let me help you see the divine light in you. And let me help you, be okay with the people who don't. Because especially as we've talked about in connection to families, especially, it's not going to happen. But tulip poplar's like, just keep shining. Just keep doing it. It'll say sometimes to me, when you get a chance, drop a bloom. For people who don't have the ability to look up and see, like occasionally drop it so they can find one and be like, oh my goodness, have a little bit of magic.
You hinted at heart, and it almost seems like it's too big of a topic, but I think we can't go on. We can't end without talking about the heart. And how is your heart different from the beginning of this process until now? And particularly, what was the role of tulip poplar?
This is actually coming full circle really beautifully. So I began with the story of it saying to me at the beginning, or me feeling it being an impenetrable fortress. And so at the time I thought it was the tree, but what it taught me was, no, sweetheart, that's you. Because this idea of how we armor our hearts, we armor them up. So when I felt that, fortress wall around tulip poplar, what I was really tapping into was a fortress wall around my heart, even though at the time I thought I was loving and kind, and I mean, I guess I was. I mean, people thought so, right? But I was guarded. And so part of what tulip poplar has been teaching me over the years, and this is a very key word, is vulnerable, like how to be vulnerable. And I'm going to read this quote. I think I might have done it before. I read this thing all the time now. But a friend of mine, Lance Howard, he was sort of like defending me when I did my Into Sophie interviews because I don't think he needed to, but I think he was afraid that people weren't going to like take me seriously with how I am with the plants because I wasn't in that kind of plant communication environment. And what he wrote about tulip poplar at an interview I had done with it was so on point. I was like, this is amazing. So it's on my wall. So it says, tulip poplar communicates with fully open heart without fear because its divinity is transparent to its consciousness. You're like, what did you just say? And what it is tulip poplar, the tree. I am the tree and the tree is me. I'm not there yet, but we're getting there. Communicates with fully open heart. So I can stand now and face the world with my heart. It's not armored the way it was. There's still some stuff there, I'm sure, but like the vulnerability, the ability to have my heart be open to face the world. And then he said, without fear. Because that's why we're doing it, right? Because we're afraid that dagger, you see, the seed, it said to me once, it pointed out the dagger at its seed pod and said, if you don't use me, it's going to feel this way. It's going to feel like a dagger in the heart if you don't use me. And part of what it meant was slip on, slip off. We've talked about that before, the bark, slip on, slip off as a shield when you need it, having discernment about who and when to protect yourself, but also how it nourishes the heart so it can be vulnerable. I heard someone say once, like, the softer and softer and softer you get, the less and less and less it is that anything can hurt you because you're not hard, like it can't break. You just got softer and softer and softer and softer, like stuff just starts going, down into you. Oops, sorry, instead of like it, breaking. So this vulnerable aspect and letting go of the fear, and part of why that starts to be able to fall away is part of that impenetrable fortress aspect is not just that you guarded your heart. Part of the positive spin off the impenetrable fortress aspect is there's an impenetrable fortress around you, but rather of like stone or something hard, it's light. Like there's an impenetrable fortress of divine light protection around you. Shine your heart, open it up, love the people, be yourself. And that's what, he said is because it's divinity, it's transparent to its consciousness. In other words, it knows it's divine. And this is what I mean by like returning to ourself, to where like in your heart of hearts, who you are. And I was raised being told, although it could get confusing, I was raised being told I was a child of God. I was a daughter of God. I was a divine daughter. But coming to know that, and when he says it's transparent to its consciousness, it's just transparent. It just knows it. It just is. So I am the tree and the tree is me. There's not even a question anymore. It just is. So I feel like Tulip Poplar has been helping me open my heart, become vulnerable in my heart, have more courage, like I mentioned, in my heart, be more courageous, be able to stand and face it, be more authentic. That's also a word, the Tulip Poplar, more authentically, or to speak from my heart, to act from my heart. Tulip Poplar talks about that our heart is our compass. It's our compass. And so it helps us begin like, okay, where's due north for me? How do I set my heart to due north? So there's that. How do I have my heart in the right place? This is very important because the Spearfinger story that I've alluded to some, Spearfinger keeps her vulnerable heart, her only vulnerable piece, because she's made of like stone, she's like a stone covering, in her hand, clenched. Like your heart doesn't belong there. It's not in the right place, right? So I just feel that Tulip Poplar has helped me like unveil my heart more, reveal my heart, be willing to be more vulnerable, like be more authentic, because anytime we do any of those things, we're chancing rejection. Like even when I say to my kids, I love you, I'm so glad I get to be your mom. I have had teenagers and I'm going to have more, and honestly, they will like eat your face sometimes, even at their best, because sometimes they're mad at you and sometimes they're mad at the world, but they'll be mad at you. Like you're going to get the brunt of it. But you just keep opening your heart. Like I had this conversation with two of my older kids a while back, and it was actually over my Tulip Poplar statue. They didn't like my Tulip Poplar statue. They were finding fault with my Tulip Poplar sculpture that I have. It's like a personified Tulip Poplar tree that a friend of mine made for me, and I love it. So I was sitting there listening to them, and really, honestly, what they were saying, it was really hurting me. And it did. It felt like a lot of daggers in my heart because they were talking about something that was dear to my heart. It was a really vulnerable, precious part of me. So I was listening, and it hurts. And, they didn't mean it that way. They're just being the ages that they are. So that night I went to bed and my heart was so wounded. But I got up the next morning and I decided I'm not closing my heart up. I'm not. Mm-mm. For the parents we wish we had and the parents we wish we were, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to make breakfast and I'm going to say hi and I'm going to say good morning, and not just fake, but I am going to open my heart to them. I'm not going to close up to them, And that's what I did. I went out there and I meant it when I said good morning, how did you sleep? I meant it when I gave them food and asked them, would you like some more? I meant it when I said, did you get enough? Do you need anything else? I meant it when I said, I'm so glad you're here. You're able to visit, and I just don't believe any of that would have been possible if it hadn't been with this tree. Because I would have just piled it up because you're not going to hurt me, So I feel like that's part of the spiritual aspect. I've had physical aspects because it is also for the physical heart and tender, vulnerable parts to the physical heart as well. But that's some. That's not even all. That's some of how I feel Tulip Poplar has changed my heart. And honestly, Tara, I know that I'm just still going to be human. That's the way it is. But I just so hope my heart keeps opening. And I just hope that I'm going to get to it. But I just hope it just keeps opening and that I can, at some point in time, let everybody in, everybody in. I say that was also noting Tulip Poplar's discernment, with who and when. But it's very hard to explain that vulnerability and authenticity and openness, the courage to have that and be that way is really one of the most valuable aspects I feel of this tree.
Do you still feel that fear of being that vulnerable?
Yeah, but it's not the same. Even the way that I'm talking with you in this conversation, I wouldn't have done this, 10 years ago. I would have been guarded. I would have been just figuring out, what can I say and not say? What will people judge and not judge? What will get me in trouble and not get me in trouble? All the things. But I do still feel it sometimes, and I think that's part of why I'm still working with the plant. But there's less and less of it. There is still some of the so part of what Tulip Poplar says when it says get bigger is it taps into the fear we have of being too much. It taps into that. So when I was little, and you guys can probably totally get this when I say it, my mom was like, you talk too much, stop talking. And she also told me I had too much imagination. And so I talked too much, had too much imagination. Also, I was just taught to just this idea of modesty that we've talked about before that really isn't a good definition of modesty. But the idea was there were just so many ways you could be too much. There were just a lot of ways. And so that's still there. So Tulip Poplar is still working on that. And part of what it's trying to communicate is, what are you kidding me? There's not too much of you. I can't get enough of you. That's how the tree is. And what the tree's trying to, I feel, express is that's how the divine sees us. The divine can't get enough of us. Right? Mm-hmm. And it's encouraging us, I think, to open up to people who that's how those people see us. That's part of the discernment and the slip on and slip off. Find the people who are no, keep talking. No, keep going. No, keep this. No, keep that. I remember years and years ago, I was with Tulip Poplar, but I had this moment and I spoke with all this passion about something that just had to stop, and it just had to stop right now. And it just shouldn't be this way. And it just had to stop. And I was saying it to someone that honestly, it wasn't really any of my business. It was their life, but I was saying something that I felt was true, and out of love for them, but also it just probably really wasn't my business. And when I finished, because it all came out, I was like, oh no, what did I just do? Because I'd gotten really good at checking myself, and not doing that. But the lid was starting to come off. So when I finished, I was like, oh no. And I looked at them thinking, they're not going to be my friend anymore. They're not going to like me. I've just been too much. And I looked at them and they said, that was beautiful. You are beautiful. And I just stood there and I was like, I had never gotten that response after being that emotive. But I feel it was the moment where Tulip Poplar was like, let us give you some new experiences. let's let you experience unconditional love and acceptance from some people. Let's make it so that you're with some people who delight in you, the way that we do and the way that the divine does. So it's kind of a roundabout answer. The answer is yes, but it's not like it was, and it'll keep getting better. I'm much more this word. I'm much more fearless than I used to be. I mean, I call myself a Lirio Dangerous for heaven's sake. I mean, we've come a long way.
You've come a long way. I know that this you've is before we had this podcast. You're like, wow, Tulip Poplar is just speaking to me even more. Was there something that we didn't cover yet that just is bursting at the seams to come out?
Oh my goodness, there's so much. I wasn't sure I was going to do this, but I think that I'm going to do it. This is a new part of its medicine, but I think I'm going to do it because it's just time. So, Tulip Poplar has been talking to me about the Cherokee story of Spearfinger, which I mentioned. And the Cherokee story of Spearfinger is that she was an ogress, like a mountain ogress. And she would eat the livers of her victims, particularly children. And she would shapeshift and take on the form of people that her victims could trust. And then she would lure them in, usually as an older woman or an aunt or someone like that. She would lure them in and kind of ask if she could brush their hair, maybe lull them to sleep, and then with her right index finger, which they said was like a spear, like a bone, or some say an obsidian stone. And it looks in the pictures, the illustrations some people do, it looks just like a tulip poplar dagger there in the center. She would use it on the back of their heart, which is part of tulip poplar medicine, back of the heart, in very physiological ways, and the back of the neck, and draw out the liver and not leave a scar or anything, eat their liver, and then the person would usually pass a few days later after becoming very sick. And so the Cherokee were like, we've got to do something about her, because it's not safe for us to go out into the woods and into the forest because we can fall victim to her, but also we never know if she's entering our camp. Like if the strangers that come in are shape shifting, or even the people we know, if they went out alone, are they coming back, or is it her? So they created this pit, and they thought they'd trap her in the fall when they're burning to harvest chestnuts because the fire would attract her because there's their camp. So she came. I'm making this very short, but she fell into the pit and she was angry. So she lost that old woman, persona that she had, and she becomes Spearfinger, and she's shrieking, and they're shooting at her with arrows, and they can't destroy her because her skin and her dress were like stone. She's an impenetrable fortress. And so they couldn't get at her with the arrows. So the story is that the titmouse came, a little bird, and its song sounded like, in Cherokee, heart, heart, heart. And they shot at the heart and nothing happened. She just got angrier because she realized what they were trying to do. But then the chickadee came, and the chickadee landed on her hand, her right hand, which was where she kept, isn't this amazing? The one vulnerable part of herself, her heart, clenched in her hand where she had the spear finger. And it landed there, and its little song in Cherokee sounded like, here, here. And so they trusted, and so they shot for the hand, not knowing why, just trusting. And one arrow hit a little trigger point, like where the finger hits the wrist and her hand opened, and they shot the heart, and they destroyed Spearfinger, this ogress shapeshifter that would eat the livers of its victims, and particularly children. And she had this stone dress, this stone body, this way of deceiving, but this vulnerable spot that the chickadee helped them find. So that's the Cherokee story. So I heard it recently because of a friend who introduced the connection between possibly chickadee and tulip poplar to me, and I looked up chickadee. I find this story. I read it. Now that we've had this conversation, you can hear all of the echoes in this. of the impenetrable fortress, of the vulnerable heart, of the spear, like the dagger, the vulnerability, the children, all these things, children without parents. There's the children, they're out, in the woods, they're gathering, they're playing, right? They're not protected. All these things. So recently, I woke up one morning because I've been really looking into this story and sitting with it because Tulip Poplar is obviously in this story. And I sat up in bed a little while ago, and the first words I heard was, Tulip Poplar is Spearfinger's daughter. And then this whole story spilled out. And I grabbed my notebook and I started writing it. I won't tell it all now. But that the Tulip Poplar tree is the daughter of Spearfinger. And that it gave me its origin story. The Tulip Poplar tree gave me its origin story because you've heard me say before, it is an origin tree. What is your origin? Not just parents, but even further back, right? This idea of origin. So it gave me its origin story and how it came to be, the Tulip Poplar tree, and then it presented itself and all the medicine that it offers for that Spearfinger way of being, for like that spirit of Spearfinger that's really vile, that preys on the vulnerable, that uses shape shifting and deception, right, to hurt others. Even this sickness with the liver, or this idea of the back of the heart. And maybe sometime we'll share the story together, but even this parent-child relationship, because obviously Spearfinger was not a good mother, right? So it wants to share that a little, and maybe some people will pick up from the story what you hear, the spirit of Spearfinger. That Tulip Poplar is the medicine for that. And we still have like the spirit of that in the world now. But what Tulip Poplar has to offer as a tree to sort of finish that way of being, finish that, that really vile, deceptive, predatory spirit that can be present on those that are vulnerable and alone, children or otherwise. So that was probably an unexpected ending, but there you go.
It's a fascinating ending, and a very interesting one, to let the mind
Play with
everything. Yes, all of that. Well, before we wrap up, is there anything else? Because I don't feel like I want to.
You're like, I don't want to finish. Well, you know what? I will say this, because we probably do like need to finish, and we can always talk more because there is a lot to the street.
Mm-hmm.
But I will, two things maybe. One, I'll just offer that I am offering, starting in September, the 1st of September, it's a Tulip Poplar apprenticeship. And I hope nobody checks out like, oh, here comes the advertisement, I'm going to click off now. Don't, because that's not what's going to happen. But the thing is that I know there are other humans who resonate with this tree and its medicine, not only because maybe they feel they need it for their own situations, but because it is them. It resonates, something resonates with them. And part of that story of Spearfinger that's been coming through is Tulip Poplar sort of telling me that it's gathering its children, it's gathering its people up again, to be able to be embodied in the world. So that starts in September for anybody who's like, I need more of this tree. Because that's how I would have been. Like if I had listened to this years ago, I'd have been like, I need this tree. So for anybody who's thinking, I need more of this tree, I want more of this tree, like I feel a resonance with this tree. That starts the 1st of September. And my intention with it is to make it a transmission. I mean, my intention is, when you talk about the heart, to pour as much of my heart, which is the Tulip Poplar, into this as I possibly can. So that's one thing. But the other thing I thought we could do before we finish is maybe I could sing to you the song that Tulip Poplar recently gave me in connection to the Spearfinger story, because there's medicine in the song as well.
Sounds wonderful.
Do you want me to do it?
Yes.
All right. So this is a song that Tulip Poplar gave me and said that Spearfinger eats the liver. And the song that Spearfinger would sing, there's different variations, but basically it's Liver I Eat is the song that Spearfinger would sing as she walked through the forest, and some other haunting songs, trying to sort of spell lure in her victims. So Tulip Poplar offered this song as the song that Tulip Poplar sang as like a counter to it, and even as a way of creating an impenetrable fortress itself for those that were like within its proximity in the forest. Okay. Hand I open, child I love, child I love, child I love. Hand I open, child I love, rest here in my heart. Are you alone? Are you afraid? Far from home, straight from the way, do you hear her singing, hauntingly sweet? Come under my branches, stay close to me. Hand I open, child I love, child I love, child I love. Hand I open, child I love, rest here in my heart. I'll give you my armor, give you my light, keep you safe all through the night. My heart I'll protect it, my bark for a shield. Spearfinger's hungry, she can't find a meal. Hand I open, child I love, child I love, child I love. Hand I open, child I love, rest here in the dark, rest here in my heart.
Very lovely. Another wonderful ending point. So lovely.
Thank you, Tara.
We have some beautiful comments in the comments. Thank you so much for participating. You'll want to check out the comments too, Amanda, when you get a chance. A lot of them are on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Make sure to like, subscribe, share, turn on notifications. We put up advance notice when we're going to be doing these, and sometimes we do them impromptu as well. And so have a wonderful day, everybody. I know I can speak for Amanda as well, that we hope this medicine reaches you in all the nooks and crannies where you need it.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.